Hello and good morning from New York City. I am Sarah Demy. I'm the founder and CEO of Demy-Colton. And on behalf of the Demy-Colton team, along with our partner for this salon, the ENTENTE network of companies, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the first installment of a new series that we're doing called The Briefing Room.
And I'm Virginia Amann, CEO and founder of the ENTENTE Network. We're so pleased to be partnering with Demy-Colton to launch the Briefing Room as part of their virtual salon series. This is a deep dive analysis into up-to-the-moment issues, and certainly policy change fits that category. Healthcare has been working to adjust to significant changes since the IRA was passed in 2022. We've got congressional changes, we've got executive orders. We've certainly seen a lot of changes, even just in the last week itself. Government shutdown. There was a new announcement yesterday from President Trump on a deal to lower prescription drug prices. So all of these are having a significant impact on the future of the healthcare sector at the patient level, at the state level, certainly across health and hospital systems, and for the biopharma industry as well. So I'm really pleased to share this hour with three panelists who are coming at this challenge from very different vantage points. Michael Heifetz, Maria Ghazal, and Annalee Armstrong as well. So I'm just going to give you all an opportunity to introduce yourselves and maybe give a 1 minute fast take on the policy issues that you're eyeing right now. Can I start with you, Maria?
Great. And thanks so much for including me. It's really a delight to be part of this series, especially the first one. So my name is Maria Ghazal. I'm the president and CEO of the Healthcare Leadership Council. The Healthcare Leadership Council, or HLC as our acronym, is an organization based in Washington, D.C. for the past 35 years. And we are unique in that we are advocates for better patient outcomes. And we do this by bringing together members from all the sectors of healthcare. We are a cohesive group of payers, providers, manufacturers, both pharmaceuticals and devices, and a whole host of others that maybe don't fit neatly into those categories, but as healthcare has become more complex, we have opened the membership up to even more. So we have health IT, we have employee assistance programs, all sorts of members, and the issues at the top of our mind, first and foremost, is access to coverage. We think that is critically important for people to have good health, and so we are working on and I'm sure we'll get into this, whether it's enhanced premium tax credits. We work on affordability, access, and innovation. So those are, and I'm sure we'll dive into what all that means. So thanks again.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you here and really appreciate that sort of cross sector point of view that you bring to the table. Michael, can I turn to you?
You can, and like Maria, very pleased to be here, and so thank you. I'm Michael Heifetz, a managing director with Alvarez and Marsal, affectionately known as A&M. We are a management consulting firm assisting and supporting state governments, the federal government occasionally, and private sector entities in addressing a lot of these financial, operational, and regulatory dynamics, some of which we'll talk about today. We come in and help states implement various changes, assess their status as to how they would attack these problems, and also the same with the private sector and their interactions with government as well. I'm a former Medicaid director, former state budget director, former Zamboni driver, all kinds of things to come at this from multiple angles. And right now, our focus, as you can imagine, is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or HR1, whatever you would like to call it. We are working with numerous governments and others to assess their readiness for some of these timelines and implementations, and then to support them as they address any situations that might prevent them from reaching full compliance and maximizing their operational and financial components.
Thank you. And we're delighted to have you here. And I've been recently I was actually surprised by the breadth of services that you offer at A&M, and you work with states and also private sector, I believe, which is I'm so pleased that you're able to bring all of that perspective to us today. Annalee, let me turn to you.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me. I am Annalee Armstrong. I am the senior editor for BioSpace. We are an industry publication covering the biopharma industry. We cover everything from clinical trials to, the drug development timeline, the regulatory process, and kind of the post-marketing world of pharma. So it's been a really crazy couple weeks and months in the BioSpace newsroom. This morning, of course, we have been diving into the MFN announcement, particularly the deal with Pfizer that was announced at the White House yesterday. Some other major issues we've been following is a lot of the kind of upheaval at the FDA, the impact of the layoffs that have happened there, and how that has impacted the companies that we cover, things like FDA approval delays, that kind of thing. We've also been covering the tariffs. It's been a lot of policy of late, maybe more so than in typical years. So it's been a pretty interesting time to be a journalist in this space.
Yeah, I bet. And you just got to BioSpace about a year ago, I believe, from previous positions working in industry publications. I can tell you, we at ENTENTE love BioSpace, and it's a go-to for us for a little bit of deeper analysis into what's happening in the sector. You guys are doing a great job.
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Glad to have you here. So let's talk about the big issue of the moment, last night's government shutdown. And I want to turn to Maria. Healthcare is front and center of this shutdown. There was an extension of enhanced premium tax credits being one of the main asks from Democrats in negotiations for a deal. But it's also hitting patients who depend on innovative care services like hospital at home or telehealth services for Medicare patients, both being potentially left unfunded. Can you, Maria, talk to us a little bit about what this means this morning and what it could mean for the healthcare sector moving forward? Just give us a little context.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting building what Annalee said about how much is going on in healthcare. We like to point out that for a president who didn't run on healthcare, boy, we've had a lot of healthcare since President Trump came into office. It seems to touch every issue. So, but the question of the moment, of course, the issue of the moment is the government shutdown. Nobody wants to see the government shut down. That's for sure. It's very, it leads to a whole lot of complexities. And you're right, Virginia. I mean, just two of the issues, setting aside the enhanced premium tax credit for a moment, which we do think needs to be extended, needs to be addressed. But setting aside for the moment, with the government shutdown, well, there are essential services that will continue. There's two particular things that were caught up in this because they have not been extended permanently. One is the telehealth, piece for Medicare payment, and the other is hospital at home. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we have providers in our membership who are dealing right now with the impact of this because you have to factor in about getting paid, getting reimbursed, and what that means. And of course, nobody knows how long this will last. So it's a pretty tumultuous time, and again, nobody really wants to see this happen. And I think most people would like to see this resolved sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I can only imagine even from the patient level. Michael, do you have anything to add here? Or Annalee, I do have a specific question for you and how you're sort of covering this issue. Michael, do you have anything to add before I turn to Annalee?
Sure. Briefly, the government shuts down, and this has happened before. Medicaid and similar programs continue on. State governments and others will have to worry about timing of payments and things of that nature. But in a rational world, it does not impact patient access. It doesn't impact Medicaid enrollment of things like that regular people depend on every day. So when you hear essential or non-essential services and what the shutdown is, typically Medicaid is not in the category of being shut down, so to speak. It does pose challenges for states on the back end, and if they are financially strapped more severely than normal, it can cause them some dilemmas, but it should not be impacting care and delivery to Medicaid patients and recipients.
Really, really helpful to understand that. Annalee, how does your team stay on top of covering something that's so fast moving? I mean, do you have teams assigned to specific issues? I'm just curious how that works in your newsroom.
Yeah, for sure. So we do have, each editor has their own expertise. I personally cover more of the business angle, and my colleagues cover things like the daily news cycle and then the clinical side of things. When it comes to some of these really challenging issues that kind of hit all sides. We just work at it as a team. There's a lot of information sharing that's happening in the background. This really is, we try not to be a 24-hour news team, but sometimes these kind of late stories do happen. The shutdown is not, this is a congressional story. We don't cover Congress super closely, but there's of course an impact on the businesses that we cover, so we have to. So this was a story that I jumped on yesterday. We did kind of lay out the impacts for the businesses that we cover. That's the FDA. Kind of fortunately, the way that the FDA runs, business is going to mostly continue as usual. About 86% of the FDA staff can continue because the FDA's budget is mostly covered by user fees. Every time a company submits a drug, they pay a fee for that. And that is what helps keep the FDA afloat year round, and especially in these shutdown situations. But, there's been a lot of disruption at the FDA over the past 6 months. There have been a lot of layoffs. So we are talking about an agency that has been significantly, I don't want to say damaged, but there's less people there to begin with. So 86% is, out of less people. So there's going to be some challenges. There's going to be some delays to approval applications. My understanding is that no companies cannot apply for new drugs at this moment. So that's going to hurt some biotechs and pharmas in the near term.
Yeah. Thank you. And some, I think, concern recently about FDA sort of moving almost into a drug advocacy role. But we'll come back to that topic later. Lots of other things to cover today. Let me turn to MFN. This was a major issue with more news this week. And in fact, yesterday, a health economics research organization put out a report with some frankly very startling statistics about the potential impact of the MFN across the healthcare ecosystem and to patients. So I just wanted to share some of their findings and predictions around that. This was assuming that the top 50 drugs by spending in each of the Medicare Parts B and D are impacted by an 85% gross price reduction. But with that, they were predicting a loss of around 2 million jobs, a lot in New York and also California, a loss of $600 billion in federal tax revenues, another $450 billion in state tax revenue, a loss of $2.4 trillion in earnings in the biopharma sector, reduction in ASP payments to hospitals by more than half, which could lead to the closure of community and rural treatment centers, the very dire potential disappearance of nearly all venture funding for early and late stage companies, and with that, a 48% reduction in patents and risk to the U.S. economic security by incenting competitiveness and growth of biopharma sectors and other healthcare sectors in other parts of the world. It sounds pretty scary. Annalee, if I could turn to you as a member of the media, I mean, how credible do you find these predictions, and how do you sort of assess this kind of prediction coming from health economic research organizations? And are your readers and some of the folks that you're interviewing echoing these same kinds of concerns?
Yeah, we absolutely pay attention to studies like this. I think the headline number in that, the 85% price reduction, seems unrealistic. I think that's maybe a worst case scenario. We saw in the deal that President Trump signed with Pfizer yesterday, it did not go that far. There was one drug that they had kind of in the headline of the fact sheet that was released that had an 80% discount. So it's not going to be 85% across the board. But the people in the biopharma industry are absolutely echoing these concerns. There has been a lot of pushback. We still so far do not have a concrete policy here to tell us what this is going to be. So, I think Michael was saying that people are looking for stability, they're looking for certainty, and we do not have that yet. But in general, I think there have been a lot of objections to the MFN policy. We have kind of noticed the narrative shift among pharmas where they're saying, well, yes, the prices in the US are high, but that's because we have to pay for innovation. So there was a shift in companies pushing for prices to go higher in other nations. And that was something that the White House adopted a little bit and kind of saying, yeah, well, we're going to use that in our tariff negotiations, that kind of thing. So I think this is a challenging, it's a challenging moment to really stake a claim and say this is going to be the impact. I think we need to see more deals like the one we had with Pfizer, if more companies are going to do that, to really fully understand what the impacts are going to be.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that, I think, in a little bit. Maria, there's got to be some opportunities in MFN pricing. I mean, I'd love to hear from you what you think those might be and also some of the risks.
Well, I think, building on what Annalee said, everyone wants better access, and the cost is always a concern for everyone across the whole healthcare ecosystem. So I think that, that there's an acknowledgement that there's concern about costs, whether it's on drugs or other parts of healthcare. But what we have pointed out is that just adopting someone else's system and without acknowledging the uniqueness of the American system and how much we do pay for innovation, it has to be a lot more thoughtful. I think that what just the events of late between investing in the United States, which is part of what this administration has been really encouraging, and we've been amplifying every time one of our members is investing in the United States, and also it really trying to meet the policy objective where you can. I think that those are interesting aspects of this, and it goes toward some of what we've seen with the administration is let's do more about encouraging certain behaviors rather than just putting out a new regulation and saying that this is it, because as we all know, I mean, policies change when administrations change. So I think that it's an interesting example of how to use these different opportunities being from the White House and others. But there are challenges to just fully adopting this. We would, and Annalee listed some of the concerns, but fewer drug approvals to just have less innovation here, what all the impacts on that. So it needs to be thoughtful. I think that seeing different responses is interesting. I don't know. I mean, it's so new. I think it's hard to say much more than that at this point, but.
No, that was great. Thank you. And I just want to just briefly mention that you are able, as anybody watching this is able to submit questions, I believe. So please feel free to do that sort of during the conversation. We'll get to some of those at the end. Michael, can I turn to you for a minute on this issue? Can you talk to the state level? I mean, what are some of the downstream impacts that might not be being anticipated? And can you talk about, potential impact to Medicare and Medicaid programs?
Sure. And like others have said, there's some clarity still missing. It's
Sure.
a day full of all kinds of major news that, as we were talking beforehand, in a single day, any one of those issues, shutdown, the military conversation, et cetera, would have all been top line. Now we have them all hitting at once. So there's some overload there that we're all managing. At the same time, from the releases I've seen from the White House, it's focused on Medicaid for the moment. Then there are other articles discussing some downstream impacts potentially on Medicare and the commercial market. Medicaid often follows those other two, but that isn't sacrosanct. So this could inevitably have some impact on pricing in the other markets. So it's a risk reward to try and manage. Okay, we're going to cut a deal on this sector, Medicaid, and not have it impact other sectors. And I'm sure those conversations are going on behind the scenes. Medicaid already receives significant rebates from the drug manufacturers in exchange for full access to those drugs. So it's unclear how much of a savings it will be to Medicaid, but on the surface, it appears that there would be some difference just by the examples in the pricing they gave in the press releases and other public information. Rolling out for patients in the Medicaid world, it has very little impact. They pay very little, if any, copays today through public policy. And given the purpose of Medicaid, that's a rational policy. So it doesn't impact the consumer directly in the Medicaid universe. It does impact the Medicaid programs and state governments, and potentially will help state governments expand access to certain drugs and also just manage their bottom lines, which are always a challenge more so today and more so in the prescription drug space, which keeps eating up more and more of each dollar of Medicaid spending.
Okay. Very, very helpful to understand. It's interesting when we talk to some of our clients, and this seems to be across the board in the sector. I mean, these are big things that are happening that have very long-term downstream impact on their businesses, on patients, and yet pharma and even state leaders and leaders across other sectors seem to be paralyzed on some of these issues. Are they engaging enough in an open way? And I always like to sort of talk about the communications landscape as well. As part of these discussions, I think that's so important. So I'll throw that out to any of you. I mean, are we having open enough conversations? Some of this is the impacts of these things are very technical, and I think it's hard for individual voters and patients to understand how it might affect them. Should we be having more open engagement on some of these issues, and are we doing enough on that front?
I think paralyzed is a really good word. We're not seeing a lot of business leaders in pharma speaking up. I think, Pfizer's Albert Bourla did, of course, appear at the White House yesterday. I would say that he kind of played the game a bit. He went to President Trump. He made a speech in the Oval Office. Will that help him in the long run? I really don't know. This is I would say, dangerously partisan atmosphere. You might win half of your audience and lose half of the other half with that kind of action. So that was interesting to see him do that. But he is the first pharma leader to really step up and do that. And the rest of them are, for the most part, keeping their heads down. But we hear on earnings calls that investors are demanding a response. How are they going to do this?
Yeah, we've seen that too.
Yeah, for sure. So there's the reporting period is coming up again. I'm sure this will have a similar round. But I would say you can't keep your head down in this moment. It's really a lose-lose. It's a real communications challenge. But my hope as a journalist, of course, is always that people are going to step up, say what describe the challenges that they're having, because policy is changing so fast. And if it is going to have detrimental effects, we need to know that. So I do hope that more people step up. And I think, Albert Bourla, Pfizer yesterday, their shares have gone up 10% in the past 5 days. And that is directly due to this press conference that happened in the White House. I think more companies are going to want perhaps to see if the same thing will happen for them. But it's a bit of a dangerous thing to choose right now.
Sure. Well, you never know. I mean, is it really first mover advantage? Is it not? We've been organizing a lot of behind closed doors roundtable discussions just so people can get together and talk about some of these issues. But I think what we've been hearing from top communications leaders is that they just don't know if the old playbook will even work anymore. And so, nobody really wants to be the guy with his neck out, so to speak. Maria, I saw you maybe lighting up there for a minute.
Yeah. So, there's different ways to advocate. I mean, the press is one avenue, and a publication like BioSpace is very thoughtful. I think you mentioned maybe in an earlier session, you're not trying to be a 24-hour news cycle. The news is not always fair. It's a lot about headlines. You're in a different league, your publication, and so are some others that that are go-to and help policy. So that's one avenue to get your message across. But there's a host of other ways that we all know. I mean, one-on-one meetings. I would say that trying to be very fact-based, nonpartisan, and relying on whether it's associations or other coalitions to say, here's our viewpoint, and backing it up with reports that are transparent, that say, that are footnoted, that say when you do have an argument. I wasn't familiar with the report you mentioned earlier, but that would be a good example of, okay, let's dig in. Like, where did all these facts come from? So I think there's a lot of different ways to talk. And I mean, you mentioned, I mean, it is a partisan world, and I think organizations and companies are probably thinking very carefully most companies have a whole checklist of, before we weigh in on something, do we have a special point of view? Now, maybe if it's your industry, it's critical to what you're doing, but I think that this is a world of there's a lot of thought going into before companies weigh in on a whole host of things. So.
Can I just go broader? I mean, how did we get here? What's the biggest single factor that's driving negative public perception of healthcare today? Because I think without that, we wouldn't be seeing massive level reform. Just curious from any of you on that. I mean, is this all just a politicization of healthcare that's benefiting politicians more than the public?
Well, I think we've addressed access in this country pretty well after the Affordable Care Act. That people have access to coverage. Cost continues to be a challenge, and access to coverage maybe is somewhat addressed, but then access, every single one of us, everyone who's on this call, everyone who's watching can talk about trying to find a provider, a relative trying to find a provider. There's a big frustration about trying to find enough providers. So, one thing that we've been advocating for a long time is letting other providers practice up to the limits of their licensure. So let's lean in on pharmacists, let's lean in on nurses and others and physician assistants, and try to be more inclusive of how we can deliver the care. I think some of it is just a frustration. It's also pretty fragmented. That's why we are very much in favor of value-based care instead of the traditional fee-for-service where the compensation is based on volume. We want to look at and value-based care it's still challenging to get off the ground, especially with smaller providers. So I think there's a host of things that people are legitimately frustrated about, and then you add in that we're an aging population, other than Annalee, and so all those factors, I think we can all relate, both from a professional point of view, what we do, and also just from a personal you can see why people are frustrated.
Sure. Fragmented and also very complex, I think. Annalee, is the media part of the problem? Can the media play a strong role in closing the gap between the actual headline, the political headlines, and then the real impacts of some of these policy changes?
Yeah, I think the pharma industry has a PR problem. And I think it's something that they know that they have. I think there's just kind of speaking to what Maria said, I think it is a very excellent goal to lower drug prices. I think anybody who has tried to access a life-saving treatment and sees that the price tag for it is $1 million, which is, there are gene therapies out there that are that expensive. If you can't access that treatment, you are going to look at the company that is putting that price tag out there, and you're not going to have a good opinion of them. So I think that those criticisms are fair. With that said, the pharma industry is a business. In a perfect world, research would be funded by the government. We wouldn't, everybody would have access to these treatments. This wouldn't be an issue, but that is not the world we live in for a lot of reasons that I'm sure we are kind of skating above right now. But I think the media definitely has a role. I would note that I believe it was last week, there was some amazing clinical news. A company called uniQure has a gene therapy that was shown to slow the progression of Huntington's disease by 75%. That is insane. That has never happened.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing news. I was looking at the mainstream media coverage of that news, which did make the mainstream news. It was, in the New York Times. It was all over the place. In the New York Times specifically, it wasn't until the fourth paragraph that they mentioned uniQure. This is a biotech company that has developed this treatment.
Yeah.
So yeah, the media has a role. When we have these amazing breakthroughs, it's important that we have that perspective. They did get some coverage later on in the article, but these are things that these companies are doing. The other thing I would say, and I've done a lot of reporting about this, is these are people. You look at Boston, you look at California, these can be your neighbors if you live in those areas who work for these companies. It's easy to look at a big pharma and think, oh, that's a corporation. But these people are your neighbors if you live in Boston and California or North Carolina. There's other regions of the country. So I think that's a narrative that has really been lost in this conversation.
Yeah, it's just speaking at the local level. Michael, is there enough happening at the state, local level to ensure policymakers, elected leaders, and their constituents are talking to each other and really fully understand the impact of policy change? And if not, what could be better done?
They are talking to each other, and Medicaid programs talk to their regulated folks, right? The providers, the MCOs, the insurance companies, and the pharma industry. So the conversations happen routinely, whether there's an MFN policy yesterday or not. How it boils down to, a Medicaid recipient and his or her family is a different question. They will look at these things in the media, and sometimes you just throw up your hands at it because, okay, great, the president says this is going to lower prices at some macro level. How does that impact my family and me? And forget being on a public program. How does it affect any of us who are in the commercial insurance market, just getting care for ourselves and our families? What does this mean to all of us? And it's almost impossible for the media to boil it down to that micro level, to take the macro and get it to the micro. Okay. So that's a dynamic. At the same time, the media will say, okay, here's one side of it, and this should lower drug prices according to whomever. And then they'll present the study, for example, that we talked about a few minutes ago, which says the sky is falling if we implement this kind of policy. So a normal consumer is going to have trouble reconciling that. And in the meantime, has to go about their day. Mm-hmm. So how do they do that? And how do they make sure their family is getting the care they need and access to the products and services they need? And that's where governments and the media can cooperate a little better on messaging it down, so to speak, okay, and making it more digestible for folks. Not an easy thing to do, easy for me to talk about on this webinar, not easy to do. But those are the types of calls that come into state government public assistance programs. Hey, how is this impacting me? Did something just happen to my drug coverage? Is my child still covered with X? Did the price go down? They don't know how this all works because it's not their job to know how this all works.
Right.
They have other things they're doing in life.
Yeah.
So all of us in this equation have to help them do it, from the manufacturers on through.
Right. And you advise the private sector as well as at the state level. I mean, does the private sector even understand it? I think the average constituent probably does not totally. Do you think that the private sector understands even how pricing works, how government works? Do they need to do a better job at understanding that? I'm just curious what your experience has been. And I assume that you're providing resources and materials for them to better understand how to navigate in the system.
We are, and frankly, this is when we get the most types of inquiries, is when things are at more of a challenging level. We get calls when things are normal, so to speak, but it's really when things are fast moving, and if you don't move, you're in trouble. But if you move wrong, you might be in worse trouble. So how do they navigate the risk reward of that? So they do understand it, to your question. I mean, these are all smart people. They've achieved great things in life, have done fantastic research, all of those things. But the parts in the system, in the healthcare system, in the delivery system, and in pharma pricing and distribution is very difficult and differs company to company, even state to state, based on some regulations. So yes, they understand all of it, but day-to-day operationally, can they maneuver in a way that's beneficial to their customers and stakeholders while still maintaining their objectives and bottom lines? That's more difficult. And there is often a gap, at least that I have seen, between the subject matter experts within any company, doesn't matter what name we put to it, in the healthcare arena, and the comms side. So there's a gap there. And that communication gap internally, you will sometimes then feel that externally. So that's a challenge that we have often seen. And I can definitely speak to it firsthand from being in state government. Like, okay, how do we communicate this complicated new federal regulation to our stakeholders of any level of engagement or sophistication? And then the comms people change that messaging in a way that's digestible. That's a challenge. And with 70 issues going at any given moment in a day, it's even more challenging. So we tend to suggest, okay, just take a quick step back, not a long step back. But there's a new study out that we talked about. Don't overreact to it. You got to absorb it, read it. What are the assumptions in that? How does it impact things? What is it based on? So it could be very valid, might not be as valid to some portions of the universe digesting it. So it's a contradictory message. Move quickly, but take a breath simultaneously.
Sure, yeah.
But it's very important to get your bearings and then coherently plan and govern and get the message.
Thank you. I just want to come back to, government and industry kind of working together. Maria, are there some promising models of collaboration that you've seen that helps to kind of move the needle on making sure that people are talking together? I know you do a lot to convene folks. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and how you help at HLC.
Yeah, that's we are conveners and advocates. So we do a lot of convening with federal officials, at members of Congress, their teams, whether it's at the staff level or the principal member level of our membership. And these are substantive conversations. We like to say if you're invited to join the Healthcare Leadership Council, you're really asked to park your parochial interest at the door. I mean, that's something that's how the organization works the best. And there's certain issues that we may not take on, but there's actually quite a few that we do take on. If our goal, which it is how do we work for patients? How do we improve outcomes for patients? So we spend time, whether it's on the access issues. So we talked a little bit about the enhanced premium tax credits, value-based care, Medicare Advantage. We think Medicare Advantage is an excellent example of a public-private partnership. I mean, there's more than 50% of seniors are in the program now. There's there's a lot of focus on it because if seniors are electing this, we want to make sure that it is the right model. There's always ways to address certain improvements. So we do spend a lot of time there. We also spend time we're supporters of CMMI, which is the Innovation Center at CMS, which is Centers for Medicaid Services. And we put out a report earlier this year looking at, over the past few years, about 70 of their different demos and did they save money and what were the results. And we could not say that all of them about a third saved money, a third did not, a third were kind of neutral, but we just think it's a great opportunity given the vastness of Medicare and Medicaid to in order to try out different demos. And we think that that's the best place to be promoting value-based care. And then we have a number of our members they have signed on to the health tech ecosystem announcement from earlier in the summer in July, the clipboard and those efforts there. I do think that this administration, just in the 9 months that that they've been in office, are really making great headway of using persuasion to do these types of things, particularly on the kill the clipboard type of thing, and really doing some good and interesting convening. So I think that's a good opportunity to build upon.
Yeah, thank you. So I know we're getting close, and I want to make sure that we leave enough time for a good Q&A session. So let me just open it out to all of you. What should industry leaders, state level leaders be watching for in the next, and we're talking about stuff that's happening week to week. Is it possible to even look at the next 12 to 24 months? Is there anything that's maybe not fully on the radar that's coming, or maybe that's even too long of a time horizon and in this kind of very fast moving environment? But what's not on the radar that people should be paying attention to or should know about right now? And Annalee, I'll maybe open it out to you first if you're. Another question for you might be, how can folks stay better informed so that they can be making these decisions? I think you offer a lot of resources at biopharma. At BioSpace to do that.
Yeah, for sure. So, one thing I didn't mention when we were talking about the FDA shutdown is earlier this year, the rare disease priority review vouchers expired. So one of the things that I saw in kind of all of this shutdown discussion is that there are some legislators who are looking to bring that back. I think that's an issue that has been kind of lost in a lot of this conversation. Those rare disease vouchers are given out to primarily biotech, sometimes pharma get them, for developing rare disease therapies, primarily for children, which is incredible work. I think that's an issue that's really been lost, and I'm very hopeful that will get kind of tacked on to some of this legislation as the shutdown happens. Hopefully that's a bipartisan effort. It's been very successful for businesses or for the biotech. So, that's kind of one small one that I'd love to, elevate that conversation.
Yeah.
But in terms of how people can stay informed, I think it's, as a journalist, it's important to just say you need to read a lot of different news. One source is probably not going to be enough. I think that, the work that we do at BioSpace, a lot of my peers in the biopharma kind of industry publication space, we are digging deeper into these issues. We're giving different perspectives. I think if you kind of go beneath the layer of kind of some of these larger news sources, the mainstream news, you're going to find a lot more answers. And so I think that's really important to point out. And then, I think for leaders in this industry, I think the same thing. They should be doing a lot of reading, and I think they should be just trying to learn what the impacts are. From people like Michael and people like Maria, they need to understand the trickle down when they, release a therapy, like who's able to get it, who's not able to get it, how can you fix that? I think it's really important to pay attention to that micro level.
Thank you. And just out of curiosity, I mean, I know you are very busy in your newsroom, but how can folks engage with you if they've got an opinion or can act as a source? Are you open to talking with folks? I know we sometimes connect people with you, but how does that work for you? And do you make a lot of time to do that, or are you collecting information in a different way?
Yeah, for sure. As the kids would say, my DMs are always open. I have LinkedIn, I have an email. I always want to hear from new opinions. That's something I really strive to do is not just return to the same people every time. So, a lot of journalists, if they're doing their job right, they're going to be open to having conversations, to learn different perspectives.
Yeah, thank you. So let me turn it over to Maria and Michael before we move to Q&A. Anything folks should be watching for? Maybe it's more immediate than 12 months, that maybe isn't fully on the radar right now.
I think it's a balance of the business community does this better than government does, but I'll get to that government side in a second. It's that short term and long term simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yes, okay, there's a most favored nation status proposal deal on the table. What does that mean? How are we making decisions about that? In the meantime, what's happening with other things in our company, research, et cetera, and where is that all going? The pharma companies have discussed 500 billion or so in investment back here in the United States. So it's managing the long and short term at the same time. State government particularly doesn't typically do it that well. It doesn't really change substantively too often. It's a lot of incremental changes year by year. What's going on in Medicaid now could upend that significantly. And there's talk that some of what was in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act will be revised or reversed. Maybe, maybe not. Betting on that is a difficult thing to do. So state governments are planning on this longer term implementation timeline. Some of these things don't take place or don't hit a deadline until 27 and 28. But if you're not planning today, you're already behind. These are huge implementations of information technology components and things that impact right down to the Medicaid recipient themselves. So that's a balance that they all have to do. And I think state governments are getting better at that. We're seeing across government and the private sector, entities looking at their governance structure and their decision-making structure and how are they using data. We won't even get into AI today.
Yeah, I saw there was a reader question on AI,
but related
so we'll get
issue.
into it.
Yeah. But what data are they utilizing to answer what questions? And also, are they asking themselves the right questions? And a lot of entities are looking at their own structures and their operational methodologies to assess if they're in the right spot for where we are today and where things are going. And that can be holistic in this unpredictable sense and many things moving at once that traditionally didn't all move at once. Are we ready to face that? So, I'm sure Pfizer made a decision if it's worth the risk to be a first mover here. Who knows if that will play out well or poorly? We don't know that today. But they made a decision, and it was probably based on a lot of logic and data and other things behind the curtain. And other companies are doing the same thing. Not all of them have a structure and the information and data they need to actually make those decisions the best way they can. And that's where sometimes you have to assess, do we have the right team? Do we have the right expertise? Do we have the right tools? And are we combining those things? So those are questions that we sometimes receive, but those are also questions we will ask of clients and potential clients. We don't have all the answers. We have to make sure we get the right questions on board to support a path forward.
Yeah, that's how we approach things in communications and marketing as well. Maria, let me close out with you before we turn to Q&A. I mean, what should folks be
Sure.
watching for in the next, 12 months or, or nearer term if it's not possible to even go out that far at this point? What's maybe not fully on the radar for folks?
Well, it's not so much that it isn't on the radar, but I think it's an issue that nobody really wants to address until it is an emergency sometimes, and that's cybersecurity and these threats and ransomware and all these other things. So we did put out some recommendations both for ourselves, for the private sector, and also for the government earlier this year. I think it's in the news when an attack happens and we get all worried, and then we remind ourselves that 92% of healthcare organizations were attacked last year, and something happened. Two of our members had issues, and just hearing the recovery of that. So I think there's a lot of planning, and it is on the radar for folks, but I'm not so sure it's on the radar for policymakers until it becomes a crisis. So I think it's something that it behooves us to remind them that we need certain assistance, because one of the unfortunate things that we've been seeing is sometimes an attitude of blaming the victim, of immediately thinking, well, you didn't do this and maybe you didn't do that, and so what precautions did you have? So I think trying to keep this attention on cybersecurity, even when it's not at a crisis point, is important. And I mean, that's on top of everything else that we just talked about. I mean, those Medicaid cuts that are coming January 2027, that's it'll be here before we know it. And I think there is a lot of talk about how can we push aside some of those and get some changes before even that happens. But I think we covered it, and if we're covering AI in the Q&A, I think we've touched on quite a few issues.
I did see one viewer question. I know this was a very wide-ranging, but also very timely conversation. I want to thank the three of you so much for your really deep insights. I think it helps people to feel more informed about what's happening right now, and also better understand how to navigate the space. So let me turn it back to Sarah Demy, and we can go into the Q&A session.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Virginia. I think I froze at the very beginning, so I didn't get to do a complete intro. Welcome to everybody. I do want to let everybody know that this session has been recorded and it will be posted on our website later on today. So for many other viewers to come in and see it and hear what you have to say. One of our first questions relates to the biopharma space, and it's an issue that I'm sure all of you have heard about people not understanding what it takes to develop an innovative drug. Most people have absolutely no idea the research, the challenges, the failures that go into developing a new innovative drug, and how much money it costs and how much time and effort goes into it. I don't think either pharma or bio have effectively communicated, and I don't even know how you would do that. How would you communicate that to the general population so that they have an appreciation for the risk, the high risk, and the money and everything that goes into pursuing new innovative drugs? And maybe, Annalee, we can go to you first since you're a journalist.
Yeah, for sure. And this is definitely an issue that I have covered. There are different estimates, but it costs, billions to develop one single drug. I have seen estimates as high as 8 billion for a single drug. So that's a lot of money. And if you're a pharma company developing that, you have to figure out a way to recoup those costs. The timeline for developing a drug is about 10 years. And drugs can come from different places. They can come from universities, they can come from research centers, or they're discovered in-house at a pharma or a biotech. There's a lot of different ways. Some of my favorite stories that I've ever written are talking to the people who literally had that aha moment and they discovered a drug that later went on to be approved. And that is a rare occurrence. There is a high failure rate along the way. So drug development is a very difficult business. And I do not think that there
is the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just discover a drug. You
Yeah.
have an idea, and then you have to go through the whole research and implementation process. That's a 10-year process,
Yep.
easily.
Yeah, you have to do there's preclinical testing which takes years. There is, human testing. There's three different phases of human testing. It's a long journey. And then you have to go through the FDA process and you still might not get approved, depending on your data. So yeah, it's a real challenge. And I would say that there is a movement now among not so much pharma companies, but among industry groups. There's a group called No Patient Left Behind that has really championed this, to try to show the work, to try to say, listen, these are people who are like, these are innovators. These are, these drug companies are making these drugs. They're finding them, or, here's the origins of this drug. And I think that's a really important conversation. Like I previously said, these could be your neighbors if you live in certain areas of the country who literally found these things. And that's something, I think Americans are very proud of innovations. And I think it would be a good thing for the pharma industry for that kind of same pride to be shifted to this industry, which is finding these drugs, in this country, which I think is a great thing.
Yeah, let me bring up a point. You said pharma, and most biotech companies are not yet pharma.
Mhm.
So how do we support the biotech companies as we go through the process? Because typically they're the ones that come up with a lot of innovation. Pharma companies rely on them
Yeah.
to develop innovative therapies. How do we support them?
Yeah, for sure. I think
Yeah.
paying attention to, again, who was the original inventor of a drug is important. A lot of times once a drug reaches approval, even if it was developed at a biotech, it's a lot of times these get absorbed into big pharmas. They get through the M&A process. So you kind of forget that. I, as a journalist, have a weird memory for like where this drug came from, but that's not the same everyday person. I do think it's really important for Americans to understand these companies a lot of them are homegrown American companies. That's something to be proud of. So I think, just being a little bit more aware of that, they might be in your neighborhood. So I think it's just an awareness
Yeah.
question.
Sarah, if I can jump in maybe for a minute, I think there was a trend at the pharma level for quite a while to lean into social impact issues and without really telling their own stories about their own innovation. That went on for, I mean, I would say, being in communications and working with those companies, there was a strong interest in that for what I would suggest was really probably too long of a period. I think the American public in a lot of ways had kind of moved on to these issues of, how are things really affecting me at a personal level that wasn't necessarily being addressed. I do think that companies need to start doing that better. In communications, there's a real silo between marketing communications and strategic communications. We try to bridge that gap at Entente because in today's media environment, you have to be good at both things. Otherwise, you're not really reaching your audiences in the way that you should be. And I think not enough, if I'm being honest, I don't think enough communications teams at pharma and also in smaller biotech, biopharma companies, or even in other sectors, understand that shift very well. And they don't know how to play inside of this very fragmented media landscape. So those are just a couple of things. I think if teams are looking at how can they do that better, they need to assess that.
Yeah, I
Right.
think a really good example of that, Virginia, is you see the narrative shifting around obesity treatments. Companies like Eli Lilly and Novo have been trying to shift the conversation from this being a weight loss drug to a drug that can actually prevent downstream health effects and that kind of thing. So I think that's maybe, you can debate whether that's been successful because there's still a lot of, I would say negative PR around those drugs and how they're being used. But that's an effort for them to say, listen, these are real diseases. There are people who really suffer from having obesity and that kind of thing, and these drugs can make an impact.
Yeah, I think years ago, I think all of us remember when pharma had the white hat. It was always considered, great companies doing good things, and somehow that changed over a period of time. I think it had to do with regulation, full disclosure, when everybody could start listening, to conference calls and direct to consumer advertising,
Mhm.
potentially. So that's my opinion. Let's move on to another question. One of our viewers said there's an awful lot of coverage right now about Medicaid, and yet Medicare premiums are undergoing significant increases with what seems to be much less media coverage. For instance, for some, Part D premiums are increasing by 140% in 2026.
I'm happy to weigh in here. So eh, that's a pretty a good question and comment. I think part of it is that there's so much else going on, as we've been talking about all morning, but that is an important point because some changes to Part D, important changes for seniors. That's good, but some of the consequences have been, and we're expecting these price increases. We sponsor an organization called Seniors Speak Out, and that spends a lot of time with seniors, particularly talking about their Part D coverage. We have a survey out right now in the field with that population to talk about what they're worried about. We'll be announcing the results shortly, I think in the next 2 weeks or so, and having some guests on to talk about just this because it is not getting enough attention. We're trying to do our part in that, but it is a consequence of some of the other changes, and we have some ideas on how to address all of that.
Thank you, Maria. Anybody else want to comment on that? Michael, you look like you're itching to say something.
I am, but it's a little bit repetitive on the demand for the products and services in the pharmaceutical universe and the costs of innovation and getting these drugs to market. And then you take into account the gene and cell therapies. Annalee was mentioning some of those, and federal and state public assistance programs are struggling with how to pay for those, not just in the pure, how do we cut a check that big, but what kind of value is being derived from these drugs and services? What kind of data do we need to measure that? And is it getting to the patients that truly would benefit from it based on all of those clinical trials and all that other scientific and clinical data that goes into all these things? It sounds obvious that someone should get it if they need it, but then who needs it and who would benefit from it are very distinct individual clinical questions.
Yeah.
That don't often get accounted for in this kind of conversation. But, we started off talking about most favored nation status, and that's all linked to pricing. I mean, that's what this Part D premium issue is. It's linked to pricing. So, any administration has limited tools in what to do. The Biden administration chose other mechanisms. Trump administration is choosing certain mechanisms. Every time any one of them does that, someone out there says this isn't going to work or the sky is falling. So we're going to have to get past some of that and have more engagement going forward. But as we've discussed, that's a risk reward conversation, and it's not going to benefit the consumer until they're at the forefront of the conversation.
Right. Yeah. Another question that relates to this, to your comments, Michael. Are there any lessons that we can take from other countries that already use reference pricing or other international comparisons?
Yeah, there are probably some lessons. They're going to be specific, so I won't bog down in the details of that. But they also have cautions, and they have different regulatory structures, and the innovation has not traditionally come from those areas. So how do we, again, balance and achieve those kinds of things? How do we address the pricing issue without damaging the innovation issue? And you can see the struggle in that from public policymakers of both parties. These things get locked into partisan terms, but drug pricing in and of itself is not partisan. So it's actually a space where there could be some kind of bipartisan dynamic, but now I'm getting way out of my skis and too Pollyanna-ish in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to comment on that? Nope. Okay. So one of our other questions is what advocacy initiatives are in place or planned for accessing Congress and prominent health-focused thought leaders? So Michael, you and Maria probably.
The advocacy has been ongoing. What can often be most effective when I've been an advocate or when I've been on the other side of that, a public sector leader receiving the advocacy, is when disparate groups come together on an issue. So, if the insurance industry and or the pharmaceutical industry and patient advocates come into the office at the same time and say, hey, here's an issue where we're aligned and here's why, that has a lot of value. That doesn't mean the government moves immediately, but it has a lot of value. It means, okay, something's going on here where we're solving multiple problems at once, even if there is a cost and an operational component to doing it. And there's also more pressure on the advocacy community, in my mind, to come with data and objectivity about what's happening in the marketplace and what some of these initiatives may or may not do. Because government has so much data at its fingertips, not always using it in ways that are ideal, but getting better at it every day, and cautionary about AI and getting into that conversation. AI offers so much opportunity to gather that data and use it in a more actionable, effective way. So the emotions and the case studies are important, but helping policymakers get data and use data the right way to tell the right story and to get at the heart of the problems can be key. We always were asking for data. Like, advocates would come in and we would ask them, what is the data on X, Y, or Z? Or can you show us? We often didn't have it ourselves or couldn't get it easily, and they could.
Yeah,
Maria?
and building on what Michael said, that's exactly what we present to policymakers, is a diverse group of every sector of healthcare coming together and hopefully proposing. I mean, sometimes we're opposing something, but proposing and advocating for something. And we are asked about data. We try to proactively provide data. That's one of the important roles we play. But I mean, recently speaking with policymakers about prevention, they wanted to know exactly, you support this legislation that gives CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, the flexibility to look at prevention legislation longer than a 10-year window. How do you back up that support? What have you shown, whether you're a payer, provider, manufacturer, what have you shown? Do you have data that shows that you can prove beyond the 10 years that prevention actually saves money and improves? I mean, we all think that, but really coming in with, like, did you do a study? How can you back this up? So it's very important. The other thing that I think is important is knowing, what your ask is. If you asked for a meeting, if you asked for time, what are you asking, and being very clear about that. We just had our members in town a few weeks ago, and they went to see a number of members of Congress, and the ask was on the enhanced premium tax credits, solving that issue and not letting them just expire and go off a cliff and leaving tens of millions of people uninsured, or be too cost prohibitive and they won't sign up. And then the other ask was, as you consider the government funding, this was before yesterday, of course, making sure that you keep top of mind that telehealth flexibilities are going to expire, hospital at home will expire. There's other provisions for community health. There's a host of other healthcare provisions, and really saying, like, we want to make sure you have that top of mind as you work through this issue. So I think those are the data, the diversity of views, if you can do it like we can at the Healthcare Leadership Council, and then and make sure you're very clear on what you're asking for, because we hear sometimes from policymakers. We had one senator join us recently who said, I can't tell you how many times people come in my office, they get an appointment, they're all excited, and they leave, and I'm thinking, I don't really know what they were here for, other than having a conversation. So I think those are some of the important lessons for dealing with Washington, and I'm sure state capitals as well.
Good takeaways. Well, it's just a bit after 12. Virginia, do you have a follow-up comment that you'd like to make with everybody, or should we invite everybody for closing comments?
I just want to thank everybody for joining. I really enjoyed the discussion. I think it was wide-ranging and at the same time deeply incisive. So I appreciate that. I do want to plug our next briefing room, which is on rare disease. Also, I think a very interesting space right now. So let me flag that. That's taking place in November, and then I'll turn it back to you, Sarah.
Okay. Any other comments from Annalee, Maria, or Michael? Okay, with that said, I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in today, and to remind everybody that we have a meeting coming up in New York City called BioFuture. It takes place October 13 to 15. Virginia will be there. And everybody else is and certainly invited to join us for that 3-day event. And in the meantime, I'd like to thank everybody for for logging on, and thank all of our speakers and Virginia for organizing such a great group. Thank you. We're signing off.
Thanks, everybody.